gospel of Christ. In the name of one God, creator, redeemer, and sustainer of our lives, amen. What I'm struck by in this passage is that we're back at Easter. Like this passage takes us back to that first day, the beginning of the end that we are now living in. And on that first Easter, it's been 3 days after the crucifixion, and 2 disciples have finally left Jerusalem, and they're on their way back home to Emmaus, and they're filled with grief. Their hearts are still hurting, and they're confused, and they're not sure that any of this is real, and they're not sure what to make of any of it. Their world has been turned upside down, and so they're processing, they're talking, they're trying to figure it out. They can't wrap their minds around it. And as they're discussing and just confused, Jesus pulls up next to them, but they don't recognize him. Their eyes are kept from seeing him. And Jesus says, "What are you guys talking about?" And they stop, and they stand still. And you can feel their grief, right? You can feel their sadness. He's like, "Don't you know? Haven't you heard? Jesus of Nazareth, a prophet who was mighty in word and deed before God. Like he was the one that we thought was going to save us. Right? He was the one that inspired us. He was the one that gave us these words, that gave us hope, that kind of gave us a sense of vision, that gave us a sense of meaning and purpose. And it was exciting. And, there was this community that had developed. He was the one. And then our own chief priests and leaders, right? The people of the leaders, the religious leaders of our community, they betrayed him. They arranged to have him crucified. They let us down. It's been 3 days, and then now this morning, some of the women go to the tomb, and they found the tomb empty, and something weird had happened with the body, and we don't know where it is, and there's, they had visions of angels, and, none of the guys really believed them. They thought it was idle talk, and so they went to check out for themselves, and they didn't see it. They didn't see anything. They saw the empty tomb. They didn't see the body. And Jesus is listening to all this, and he says to them, "How foolish you are and slow of heart." Right? And I don't think he says, "How foolish you are," with contempt. Foolish is just like you're befuddled, you're confused, you're not thinking clearly. And you're slow of heart. It's hard to bring yourself to the table. It's hard to bring yourself into these things. It's hard to, your heart is just kind of lethargic and stuck. And so what Jesus starts doing is he starts talking to them about the books of Moses. He starts talking to them about Genesis and Leviticus and Deuteronomy, and all of a sudden he's making Leviticus sound interesting, and he's talking and Deuteronomy, and he's talking about things that they hadn't even seen before, and they're like, "Oh, that's curious, that's really interesting." And then Jesus starts talking to them about the prophets like Isaiah and Micah and Zephaniah, and they're hearing things that they've never heard before. And something in them begins to awaken. Something in them begins to kindle. They have this sense of possibility again. Pretty soon they're at home, they're back at Emmaus, and Jesus moves like he's going to keep going, right? And they see this stranger who's about to go into the night by himself, and they beg and they plead with him, and they say, "No, stranger, stay with us. Come to our house. It is evening and the day is almost over. Be our guest. Break bread with us." So I imagine Jesus comes and they wash from the road and hang out while they're waiting for the meal to be prepared, and then they invite Jesus to be a guest at their table and to say the blessing. And Jesus takes the bread that they had made and he blesses it and he breaks it. And in that moment they see him. In that moment, their world is broken open, right? And they see him, And they recognize him, and then he disappears. And where does he go? Why does he go? He just disappears, and I imagine this moment again where they're still. He's left them again, right? This is the second time that he's left them, that he's gone. But like the first time where they felt despair, there's something else besides despair at this point. There's something else besides grief. And they say, weren't our hearts burning within us? Well, isn't there something ablaze? Like, don't we feel alive in a way that we didn't before? Like, isn't that this possibility and meaning that we didn't see before? And in their excitement, it's dark. They get up and they go back to Jerusalem to tell the other disciples that they have seen Jesus too, and he was made known to us in the breaking of the bread, they said. Now, I've always heard that story and that part of the breaking of the bread is an allusion to the Eucharist, as a metaphor for this thing that we do on Sunday mornings where we come together and we break Christ's, we remember the breaking of Christ's body, and we share and we take the bread with each other. And I'm particularly aware that we are not doing that right now. We are not sharing that meal. We're not gathered around this table together. And the reality is none of us are gathered around lots of tables. I mean, we're not having family gatherings, with extended family. We're not going to restaurants. We're not meeting together with friends and sharing meals. That all of us are at home doing a lot of cooking, right? And eating a lot of meals at our table. And so I hear this story differently this year, because that's what was happening. This was their house. This was their kitchen. This was their table. There was nothing special about this meal. They had invited Jesus, the stranger, into their home to sit at their table, to bless their bread that they had, meal that they had ground, grain that they had ground, and the meal that they had kneaded into the dough that they had baked. This was their bread. It was just the ordinary stuff of their life. Like in this moment, there's nothing extraordinary. Jesus enters into the ordinariness of their daily existence. He enters into their house, their kitchen, their table, their meal. And he blesses it. He blesses it with his grace. He blesses it with his hope. He draws them deeper into love. And their hearts are burning. That's my hope for us during this time. As we're caught in the ordinariness of our lives, the daily repetition of eating again and again at our common table, that we might see a glimpse of the God who loves us, of the presence of Christ in our midst. Amen.